You know, we tend to think of science as this quest for solid, unchanging facts, right? But what if that whole idea is, well, kind of missing the point? Today, we're going to dive into a massive shift in how science works, moving away from looking at things as frozen snapshots and towards seeing our world and, yeah, even ourselves as this incredible, constantly evolving, dynamic system.
I mean, really think about that for a second. What if the models we've been leaning on for decades to understand our own biology, our genetics, everything are just incomplete? What if they're missing the most important part of the story? It's a huge question, and it's exactly what we're getting into today.
So we're going to unpack this idea of the shade. And yeah, I mean shade in exactly the way you're thinking of it. It's this powerful and, frankly, necessary critique being thrown at older, static ideas. And we're going to see why this critique isn't just some snarky comment. It is absolutely on point. It's guiding us toward a much, much deeper truth.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll nail down what this critique is all about. Then we'll look at the limits of those old, static views and contrast that with the power of new, dynamic insights. We've got a fantastic metaphor to help make sense of it all, and then we'll wrap up with why this whole shift matters so much.
Okay, first up, the critique is on point. Let's really get into what we mean when we talk about the shade.
So what is the shade at its core? Think of it like this. It's the growing realization that our old, simple A to B models, well, they just can't keep up. They're being called out, and rightly so, because they look completely inadequate when you put them up against the messy, complex, and ever-changing reality that biology is actually showing us.
All right, Section 2, the limits of static views. To really get why this critique is so valid, we need to look at what these old-school models are actually leaving out.
A perfect example of this is a concept from our source material called dim sum. You can think of it as a kind of scientific tunnel vision, a fundamental lack of insight. For instance, if you're trying to understand how stress affects the body, a static view might just take one measurement and call it a day. But that misses the entire domino effect, right? It misses the complex, dynamic processes happening in our renewing tissues over time. And that lack of deep insight, that's the whole problem.
And believe me, this isn't a one-off thing. These static assessments, they consistently miss the mark. They can't see the crucial dynamic interplay of factors, they fail to capture really complex processes, they get stuck looking at superficial markers, and yeah, all of this can lead to some seriously outdated and just plain wrong conclusions.
And look, the language gets even sharper from here. This quote from the source material is pretty brutal. It suggests that when you hold them up against modern genetics, some traditional assessments aren't just inadequate, they're the joke. Wow.
And this table just lays it all out perfectly. On the left, you've got the old way, just looking for one thing, like, is the Y chromosome there? A simple checkbox. But then you look to the right at modern genomics. We're talking comprehensive sequencing, discovering things like hypermutable missense mutations. It's literally the difference between seeing one single star in the sky and suddenly seeing the entire breathtaking galaxy.
Okay, enough about the problems. Let's pivot and talk about the solution. Section 3. The power of dynamic insight. This is where things get really, really cool, because this new way of thinking is a total game changer. So check this out. A fantastic example is something called CES drivers. Imagine certain genetic mutations give some sperm stem cells a kind of superpower. This gives them a selective advantage, so they start multiplying like crazy, creating these huge clones of themselves. A static model would totally miss this, but this dynamic process is actually changing the game, effectively ramping up the rate of new mutations that get passed on. It completely rewrites what we thought we knew about heredity. So here's how it works. It's like a chain reaction. Step 1, a mutation gives a stem cell an edge. Step 2, because it has that edge, it expands, creating tons of copies. And step 3, that clonal expansion actually changes the mutation rate in the male germline. See? It's not a single point in time. It's a dynamic, unfolding story. Now here's where things get really mind-bending. This dynamic process we see happening in our genes, it actually has a parallel in how we think. A concept from Dennis Farhaj describes something called chiral recursive sensory mastery. Now I know it's a mouthful, but what it describes is a deep, embodied way of understanding the world, a constant process of learning and adapting that feels a lot more like a living, evolving system than some static computer program. And this quote just nails it.
This mastery isn't just about passively seeing what's there, it's a kind of insight that lets you anticipate and adapt. Think about a pro athlete. They're not just reacting to the play, they're anticipating the next move, almost muting the risk before it even happens. This dynamic kind of thinking gives us a way to understand and maybe even manage our own biological risks in a way a static checklist never, ever could.
Okay, now for my favorite part, something that really brings this whole idea home. We've got this powerful metaphor that perfectly captures the clash between static and dynamic thinking. Let's call it a tale of two cells.
So on one side, we have the racing sperm cell. This represents the dynamic approach. It's relentlessly striving, adapting on the fly, proactively engaging with its world. It's the perfect symbol for these advanced, predictive models. But then, on the other side, we have the discerning egg. It's static, passive, selective, just sitting there, waiting to pass a simple judgment. This is a perfect analogy for those old, fixed traditional assessments.
And this is where it all clicks into place. By calling the discerning egg the joke, the metaphor is throwing the ultimate shade. It's arguing that these static, judgmental systems are failing because they're completely undervaluing, or maybe they just can't even see, the power and importance of being dynamic, adaptive, and proactive.
So, we've explored the critique, the problems with the old models, and the power of the new solutions. Let's wrap it all up and get to the bottom line. Why does this shift in thinking really matter?
Okay, here's what you really need to remember. First, science is in the middle of a massive evolution, moving from simple snapshots to dynamic, living models. Second, to understand truly complex systems, we absolutely need these new kinds of insights. Third, this idea of embodied cognition isn't just theory. It's a powerful new way to think about our health and risk. And finally, remember that shade we've been talking about? It isn't just criticism. It's the vital push that science needs to get to a richer, more accurate picture of reality. So that leaves us with one last question to chew on. If these static, judgmental models are failing us in science, where else might they be holding us back? What other discerning eggs are out there in our own thinking that need to be challenged? It's something to think about, because once you start looking for them, you'll start seeing them everywhere.